Well, welcome to everyone to this dialogue series on leading in complex times. Certainly no shortage of novelties, and it looks like history is being written every 24 hours, and what was news yesterday becomes obsolete very, very fast. So certainly new times. We are delighted to welcome all of you to this short dialogue around building resilience in times of change. We have the utmost privilege of having two of our great faculty, real experts on the topic of resilience with us today. With us, Professor Nick Van Dam, who is the Chief Learning Officer at IE, but also the head of the Learning Innovation Center for Corporate Learning at our university and director of a number of programs, and frankly, has spent a long time helping organizations and individuals building resilience in times of change. Equally important today is our second panelist, Noemie Le Pertel, co-academic director and professor of the Executive Master in Positive Leadership at a university, and also a great expert on these topics. So thank you for joining us today. Let me start with, if I may, I'm going to be asking questions. Please jump in, and hopefully we have a little bit of time later on to also incorporate the questions and the points of view of our participants today. But let me start with the first question. So we're living in times of unprecedented disruption and change. What are some of the lessons that we can all learn about building resilience in these times?
Thank you, Teresa. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes,
we know, yeah. As you said, this is VUCA in action, right? So unprecedented volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and changing news. And we know that society has seen many cycles of various kinds. And currently, these global disruptions and changes are making our health more important than ever. So this pandemic is really bringing that to the foresight for us to really pay attention to this. It's a really, not only our basic well-being, but the future of work itself. So I would say we have an opportunity to look at sustainability, not only of our vitality, but how it relates to well-being on this planet. Moving from individual concerns with this phenomenon of flatten the spread, we're all taking responsibility to a greater degree. And so it's an opportunity to look at the collective and look at opportunities to consider our choices and how they impact not only what's good today, but what's good tomorrow, what's good for our neighbors, our colleagues, our loved ones, and society. So it's really, there's an opportunity in these tough times to look at and learn from the greater ecosystem and expand our awareness in a collective kind of way. Nick?
Yeah, well, thanks, Noemie, and thanks, Teresa, for the introduction. Well, when I reflect on all the news and what's happening around the world, I think it's important that we kind of downplay actually the challenges that people are facing when it relates to their health, their work, their careers, their income potentially. So I think we need to acknowledge all of that. That's key. And at the same time, I personally went through, 2 other economic recessions in 2008 and in 2001. And even at those days, actually, I remember that in the moment, there was a high level of anxiety and people thought, oh, wow, the world is falling apart. And guess what? What we have learned from history is that typically, we will get out of a crisis. The economy will recover again. And that's one, I think, from a mindset perspective, really important to realize. A couple of other things. I think also that if you go through an economic crisis like this, there are some lessons learned, there are some opportunities as well. One relates to there are ways to look at the business that we are in and explore how we can reinvent the business or potentially accelerate some change that was already going on. So I think that's important. When we reflect on people in our organizations, there are typically, people who have less work because of the crisis, but also there are people who might be overwhelmed, and there might be a need actually to redeploy a number of colleagues in organizations in new areas to support actually ongoing the business. And last, I think it's also important to realize that there will be a moment that we will get out of this crisis, and therefore organizations who keep that in mind and prepare themselves for, let's say, what I call day one, is also very important. Because then if we can start hitting the street running when we get out of the economic downturn, those organizations are really ahead of the curve.
Thank you. Those are just very thoughtful reflections on what have we learned from previous economic downturns. And some of the people listening today are really wondering sort of how can they be the best leader at this point in time? What do people expect from their leaders in times of crisis and complex times?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Very good points. And also I reflect a little bit on my own experience, again, going through situations like this and being involved with a large number of people, but also with a number of clients, but as well as some insights that we have from research. A couple of thoughts. One is, as I referred to the first question, it's important that that leaders show really empathy, concern, and real support for the people that they are working with. It's kind of put ourselves in the shoes of others. I think that's kind of a big start. Another thing is, it's important to be optimistic as a leader, to be hopeful. I believe that there's nothing worse working for a leader who doesn't believe in the future. That's very depressing. So being, optimistic, and this is not being optimistic for the sake of being optimistic. And if I reflect on insights from positive psychology, the work of Martin Seligman, he frames it like it's not about being positive. It's about looking how you interpret a situation. And I think as a leader, kind of looking ahead, looking longer term, there's a reason for optimism. Another thing relates to decision making as well, and how we, how as a leader, how we look at decision making and people around us. In times of crisis, as leaders, we have to make 100% of our decisions, typically based on maybe 20 or 30% of information. And that means that as a leader, we try to figure out how to make the right decisions in organizations. But we don't know necessarily what always the right answers are. And they might change from day to day. I was on a call with, people from a large airline company, and they shared with me that it's almost every day they have made a number of decisions, and the day after they need to go back to the drawing board because things have changed again. So that means as a leader to be open, to be honest, to be transparent, Also to be vulnerable, right? To show I don't know necessarily all the answers. I think that's more fair than anything else. The last thing relates to communication. I think we're all getting, overwhelmed with external information, and also there typically there's a lot of rumors in the organization about what's going on, what will happen, what might be the impact. So as a leader, and also what I've practiced myself, is to have very regular updates, be very transparent, have FAQ sessions with your teams, and also acknowledge, there's no information at this point in time. That's perfectly fine.
Okay. Yeah, Nick, I would just add, we're getting a message in the chat box that apparently some participants are just joining us. They were in the Adobe Connect room. So welcome to all those participants. We're speaking about what people expect from their leaders in crisis. So the only thing I would add really is that when the crisis is over, the people on your teams, the people you work with, your colleagues, the people you lead, they'll remember how you treated them as a leader and also as an organization. Were you a caring leader? Did you support your team to stay home and care for their health, care for their loved ones? Did you support that process? Were you agile in helping them deal with the life situations they're facing? And, they might stick with you now, but what we know from the research is that when people come back out of these challenges, the organizations and leaders who supported their people tend to have greater loyalty. And the ones who don't show care for the people that they're leading tend to have people who then leave at the first opportunity. So something to keep in mind is how you're actually caring for people is really important from a personal perspective, but also on a business level.
This is very helpful. And let me actually address as people are joining in, and please let me start with an excuse for the dual link. There were too many people registered for this session, and we tried to actually go with a larger platform that would accommodate all of you. So that's the reason for the confusion. Our sincere apologies. We just started, and we'll make sure all the sort of the first two questions around sort of what have been previous impacts of other economic recessions and what is expected of a leader in the times of crisis. We'll make sure those come back as we continue the dialogues. But I just maybe, if I may summarize, sort of a couple of themes on this last question, right? What are people expecting of leaders in times of crisis? If I hear you correctly, it is about, it's the time to be empathetic, to actually put yourselves in the shoes of your team members. Noemie, I really like the concept of, people will remember those times. Those are times of truth. So that's one idea. The second idea about being optimistic while, acknowledging the things that one may not know, and being transparent as another theme that's important and that people expect from our leaders. And so those are great thoughts. Let me just maybe move on to sort of another topic, which is, those same leaders that, as we said, need to keep the team together and motivated to driving through this complex times. They need to make a lot of decisions, and oftentimes in very little time with, if oftentimes we don't have all the information, in this kind of situations, we have even less. So how can you help us guide and provide helpful insights for those leaders that need to be making very important decisions in this current times?
Thank you, Teresa. I would say Nick really alluded to this when he spoke about rumors and the importance of communication. And so I think we're seeing this really magnified now because our main sources of information are through technology, through social media, these different ways that we're connecting today. But what we know from the research about emotional contagion is that whether it's virtually or in person, our emotions are causing a spread. And so there are a couple of different terms for this. There's emotional contagion, some research being done at Wharton. We've got positive spread by Christakis. And the idea is that our emotional states impact persons not only around us, I mean, they impact us and how we feel, they impact our close loved ones, but they also impact persons in our network by up to 3 degrees of separation. So sometimes we don't realize that the tone, the emotional tone, the mood states that we're embodying are really impacting the people around us. And as such, we need to be mindful of this in terms of communication, because a lot of the news that's being shared is rightfully so filled with fear, messages of anxiety. And a lot of our news is oriented towards this. I mean, we know from a neurological perspective that we are oriented towards a negativity bias, right? We respond more strongly to negative news. And our news focuses on the negative most often. So I think there's a really great opportunity for leaders to be champions of good news, to impact the system in a positive way through what we call the elevation effect. And so being mindful of our emotions and how we're spreading them and how we're spreading happiness, and then taking the opportunity to share positive news, to continue to appreciate people on your team. And at the same time, you have to regulate your exposure to the news that might be causing you anxiety. So on a personal level, you know, how do you actually self-regulate in these times? How do you recharge and how do you build that calm that Nick described? Well, you have to model those behaviors. And some of that is setting boundaries and limits. How much news we're taking in and what kind of news? What are the resources and the sources we're tapping into for that? So, you know, just one more point on embodied leadership and embodying well-being. So we also know from the research in healthcare that say you have a physician who's struggling with obesity or smoking. Well, that physician is less likely to advise their patients on behavioral change, on weight loss, and that patient may really need that. And so similarly, we can see that from healthcare physicians, but also leaders who can embody the changes they want to see on their team, who can embody well-being, vitality, transparent communication, they really have better outcomes and they scale that. So, you know, this is an opportunity for us to all self-reflect and really focus on ourselves while we're focusing on others, and realizing that will spread in the system. Nick?
Yeah, Noemie, thank you for sharing this, and I'm reflecting on it, and to build actually on your theme. You know, I think for a lot of leaders, they are running marathons today, right? So you know, there's so much pressure and so much needs to be done, and decisions need to be made. And there's a risk actually that, you know, people basically, you know, don't take care of themselves. And one area that I like to mention is sleep. You know, what we know from research on sleep is that if we get sleep deprived, guess what? It has a huge impact on a number of mental capacities, particularly on problem solving, you know, pattern recognition, but also on our ability to be empathic for other people, right? So people who become very tired, etc., they are, you know, not doing that well when it comes to, you know, decision making and also dealing with people. But there are other things as well. You know, in times of crisis, there is a tendency to make decisions very quickly. You know, we are under significant pressure and like, okay, let's make all these decisions. But of course, it's not just about the pace of decision making. It's about the quality of how we make decisions. And there are a number of important practices to consider. One practice is that we just pause to assess what's going on, to ask the right questions, but also to collect the data information that we need in order to make a high quality decision. Another theme is that in times of crisis and decision making, there are leaders who fall back naturally to their intuition. And although intuition is very important, it's still key to connect with a number of people, to gain insights from different stakeholders, and that we make decisions which are based on, you know, collective insights, facts, and to some extent, of course, intuition. Then the question is always like, you know, how are decisions made in the hierarchy, right? And obviously there are a number of areas where we have to make decisions. It needs to be centralized. And at the same time, you know, you don't want to centralize all the decision making, because then the top of the organization becomes the bottleneck when also other important decisions need to be made. So finding the balance in terms of centralization, decentralization, empowering people. And finally, you know, once decisions are made, you know, it's key that we, as leaders, we act decisively. Right? We make things happen.
Thank you, Noemie and Nick. So we are clear when we're making decisions in times of turmoil. Let's be aware of emotional contagion. Let's keep the negativity away. Let's pause. And yes, Nick, thank you for the reminder that there's no escape. Data and objectivity is still relevant on those decisions, even if our knee-jerk reaction is all about intuition. So thank you for putting this in perspective. Let me move on to a different topic. I know the two of you are huge champions of personal development in organizations. What happens with personal development in times of turmoil, in times of crises?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to start on that one, Teresa. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been in touch with, I think, over 50, 60 leaders, L&D leaders, and HR leaders around the world. And kind of no surprise, you know, most organizations have, you know, have stopped and postponed a lot of, you know, existing kind of particularly face-to-face programs. But if I reflect actually on you know, the moment we are in, I believe that there are tremendous opportunities to even develop people more than potentially before. And let me explain a little bit why. So what will happen in times of crisis is that a number of leaders will step up actually, and start really leading specific initiatives for their organization. And that's a tremendous learning opportunity for them. But also what we see actually is there are people who basically don't step up and they fall behind, right? So we see clearly actually how leaders are acting, reacting, but also learning actually in this time of change. Another thing what I referred to before is that a number of people will be asked to work on a number of new initiatives. They will be put on task forces, on projects. They will be redeployed to some extent. And of course, that's also an opportunity for learning and growth, because what we know about learning is that people only learn if they do something that they have never done before. And guess what? That's kind of what's happening now. Third, with the push for everybody to work from home, I expect that there will be an acceleration in terms of the digital transformation of organizations. Because what happens actually is that a lot of people now have to work with a lot of you know, virtual work collaboration tools that they have never worked before. And guess what? You know, it happens and it's successful. So organizations are building capabilities now for digital work and digital transformation. Last on this, also a lot of people will travel less or don't travel anymore. Some people might have less work, and it also free up time to learn. And as we know, there are a lot of opportunities to learn online. I'm very, excited and proud that at IE we have done an amazing job over the last 2-3 weeks to move, all our classes online. And I also know Teresa in executive education, we have done it. I have sessions scheduled for a large corporation to use our WOW room. So I think it's exciting actually that, organizations are moving fast to online, and because of online, we can still continue develop our people.
Yeah. Adding to that, Nick, you mentioned about some people will rise up and some might stand behind. And the research has shown us that actually, when you move learning opportunities and development opportunities to a virtual setting, you actually get more participation of people who wouldn't ordinarily feel as comfortable. So in online learning, for example, you might get more engagement with stakeholders who are in, maybe more marginalized groups. So that's something that we can be mindful of, is how to engage new voices. And I think some of our researchers in the field have been sharing in other webinars as well that some of the advantages in this kind of platform is that people get to speak up, say on the chat, and you can get everybody's voice all at once. And it's not about who speaks up first and what other dynamics are going on in the room. In a way, you're democratizing that process. So I think that's an area of real opportunity. On top of that, I think it's important to remember that these technologies are designed by people, right? And they're being used by people. And so we also need to develop our own inner technologies, so to speak, our capacities to deal with change, our capacities to embrace these technologies and to use them in just ways. In terms of, being confined and staying at home as well, we're saving a lot of commute time. And so a lot of people, yourself included, have been sharing resources, for leaders, also for children, your e-learning for kids organization. And so it's an opportunity for us to really learn and grow, and also to be creative with our time and how we are boosting our vitality. So some things to keep in mind as we're learning and developing and using these technologies: the greater needs for taking breaks, for tuning in at different points in the day, and also how to create a space and a semblance of routine in these sort of uncertain and changing times. So it's a real opportunity for us to reflect and develop those inner resources so that we can handle stress and we can optimize these systems for productivity. So we have an opportunity for an entirely new way of learning and development.
May I suggest just very quickly, before I take a few questions from participants, we still have a few minutes. Could you give us sort of a few tips on how can participants build resilience for this kind of situations? And then we'll give a chance for them to participate.
Thank you, Teresa. So Nick is sharing our model on vitality, looking at health, well-being, and happiness. About to pull it up full screen so you guys can see it in more detail. But so resilience is defined a couple of different ways, but the most common definition is our ability to overcome adversity and to bounce back quickly. And this is what we're really interested in. It's how do you actually rise? And one of the main findings in the field of resilience is that there's a popular misconception that resilience is just about sort of gritting your teeth, pushing through, and moving forward. And while it's important to do that, the most resilient people, the ones who are able to bounce back, are the ones who actually build in recovery time. So the key feature of resilience is how you're actually recovering. And so our model here focuses on different aspects of vitality, including learning and growth and development. But it looks at the whole person. So holistic learning, holistic development, and leadership. And so there's a physical component, and I'll share some tips around that. And you can see in the mind component, this yellow section on the screen, that we have a whole section on resilience. But all of these factors build on each other, and they build in ways that we can scale. So I'd like to mention a few points. And these are points for building resilience, but they're also points for boosting immunity. So really relevant today as we're dealing with challenges to our own immune systems. How can we actually look at our physical vitality and health? And so I'm going to focus on a couple of aspects. If you are not completely quarantined, if you're still able to go outside, the research has shown us that spending even 10 minutes in nature, so 10 minutes around green and trees and fresh air, can actually boost our natural killer cells, our immune mediators, and help us deal with and harmonize with the environment in a stronger way. So that is one thing. Of course, the threat we're facing in this pandemic is very real. And these are just some strategies that you can boost your resilience as well as your immunity in the process. So that's one thing. From a nutrition perspective, it's really easy with people sort of hoarding all the food, trying to prepare and have, and stock up. And then you're sitting around at home, perhaps on the computer for 8 hours a day, unable to do your usual routines, that you start to eat all that food in your refrigerator, right? And when people are stressed, they tend to go towards sugar. It's fast burning fuel. And that also triggers our cortisol system. Now, cortisol helps us deal very quickly in times of stress, our fight and flight response, but there's a cost. Using sugar as fuel and using cortisol on a long-term basis leads to exhaustion, leads to burnout, and it depresses our immune system. So one way is to avoid or minimize sugar, highly refined foods. And then corresponding to that, we want to sort of help ourselves deal with stress more effectively. We spoke a lot about decision making. And in terms of our neurological systems, the part of the brain, and I think Emily mentioned this last week in your interview as well, the part of the brain that helps us with executive function and decision making is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is inhibited by stress. And one technique that you can use to sort of boost this is mindfulness. So if you look at the mind section on our model, just really quickly on the research, practicing mindfulness, practicing a couple of minutes every day, up to 20 minutes if you can, according to the research, can help build resilience. It can help prime the brain for learning so that the initiatives you're taking to grow and expand are actually being consolidated in the nervous system and helping you focus. So that's one thing. And then a few more points. If you deal with anxiety, this would be a really good time to minimize stimulants like caffeine, chocolate. We think of them as helping us be alert, but if you're dealing with anxiety, that's actually going to add and fuel to the fire. So one thing. And then the importance of movement. Just because you can't be outside or you're not in your normal routine doesn't mean you can't move, right? So it's even more important now than ever that every 20 minutes or so, if you're at your desk, perhaps you set a reminder, play some music, get up, move around, right? And there are also immune boosting benefits to exercising. Again, at least 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes seems to be the magic number for all of these activities. And then two more things, I would say gratitude and social connection. So gratitude and hope theory, they sound like very sort of out there, happy feeling kind of interventions. But researchers like Bob Edmonds have found that if you can practice gratitude, writing, say, 3 things you're grateful for in the beginning of the day or in a stressful moment, this can really boost your immune system. And this has been shown physiologically again and again across studies. So these cognitive interventions, these changes in mindsets and reframing are key to building resilience, but also boosting your immune systems. And then I would say finally, if you look at our purpose and meaning section, you know, relationships are really key right now. We already had a loneliness epidemic, right, across the world. And we know that feeling social connection is the #1 predictor of longevity. So just because we can't communicate face to face or meet with people doesn't mean that we have to be disconnected. So our isolation doesn't mean it prevents connection. So using technology to do this, connecting with one another, checking in on our teammates, all of these things are really crucial.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very relevant and very applicable to now, right? So isolation doesn't mean that you're not connected to people. Gratitude as a way to build your immune system. Hey, just please do all make a good note of that. Nick, do you want to add anything else? Because I like to take one question or two. I mean, I love the question around ideal leaders. I'm generally very curious to know which one is your ideal leader. But Nick, anything else you want to add on the resilient?
I think resilience is obviously, it's, as Noemie explained, there are a number of things that we need to do to build our resilience level, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind. It's not one thing, there are many things. And it's also something that will build over time. But it doesn't mean we have to wait. We have to start immediately. And for ourselves on our calendar to say, hey, every day, what are some of the things, you know, the exercise and mindfulness, you know, think about nutrition. What are the things we can do every day that will help us to, you know, to boost our immune system and our resilience?
Absolutely. Thank
now
you.
we have.
Oh, Teresa, you're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Who's your ideal leader in complex times and why?
Oh.
Give us a name.
I have a name, actually. It's my one of the people I've worked with for about 10, 15 years, an amazing leader. His name is Jim Wall. He was the global partner at Deloitte. And I worked with him through, you know, kind of challenging times in the economy. And he has been a role model for me. He's been a coach, a mentor. And I think he has been, you know, kind of what I shared about leadership in terms of staying calm, optimistic, but particularly empathy and care, and also really, you know, try to put himself in my shoes at different moments. I think that makes a huge difference. I think typically talent management in organizations is a lot about policies. You know, we have a policy for something and we have to stick to the policy. But what I believe is that talent management and leadership is not about the policy. It's about the individual. It's about the connection. It's a bit, you know, knowing each other. How can you help each other? And he has been an amazing role model for me in my career, in my work.
Thank you for sharing that personal story. Noemie, do you have anyone that you want to share with all of us?
Well, I think it's really helpful to have role models and exemplars. And I think there's never a one size fits all. So, I mean, even like the question about adaptogens, right? These are herbs, for example, that people take to boost the system's resilience over time, right? But even then, what works for one person will work for another. So you really have to customize it. So I think what I would say for me is, it's the inner self, right? Like the higher self and like bringing your best self. And so I think that will be each one of us, right? And how we show up. Absolutely. And how we bring our full selves, right? And how we see the full selves in other people. So I would say, you know, it's the potential within us all, you know, and I wouldn't confine it to one person. But I think that if you have someone that's meaningful to you in all of these capacities, like Nick said, you know, the capacity for empathy and really caring, you know, people over processes, for example, then, perhaps take a moment when you're practicing gratitude or mindfulness to think about what it's like to be around that person, and get a felt sense of how you might embody some of those qualities yourself. So
Thank
that's
you.
what I would
Thank you, Noemie. Those were very thoughtful comments. And I have to rub this up with an idea. I'm very, very grateful. Therefore, I'm raising my immune system here as we speak, but very grateful to both of you for allowing all of us at IE to just bring the entire person to leadership, the entire person to business decisions, and just thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience with the larger audience. We sincerely hope that those of you who we don't get a chance to see on a regular basis on our campus have benefited from the great knowledge of Professor Van Dam and Professor Le Pertel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah.
And you embody that calm. You do.
And thank everybody for joining this session today.
Thank you. And
No,
next one is coming. We have a number of series, so stay tuned. There's a number of other dialogues next week as well. Take care. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.